I didn't feel like I completely fit in the illustration world because I wanted to do these other things too. I did, nerd out over using InDesign to make my CD cover, where other people they cared more about making the artwork behind it as opposed to making this final product. And I very much like making products and having that thing in my hand.
From the cubicle to the lab, the studio to the war room, climbing up the corporate ladder, or joining a scrappy startup, experience a day in the life of the jobs you want.
This is the Experience a Day in the Life podcast. We interview professionals, entrepreneurs, and recent grads about what a day is actually like on the job, hour by hour, or as we like to call it, their ADITL, spelled ADITL, which stands for A Day in the Life.
This podcast will inspire you to gain experience beyond the classroom and launch a career of your own. We're your hosts, Chris DeBow
and Matt Poe.
Welcome to part 2 in the 2-part UX Marks the Spot series. In part 1, we went through hour by hour in a day in Greg Hill's life as an Associate Experience Design Director at Zynga. In this episode, we'll take you through Greg's career journey so you know what skills and experience are necessary to land a job as an Associate Experience Design Director. Greg was always a designer at heart. Even though some around him doubted his choice to major in illustration, Greg was able to hone in his skills and passion and make a fulfilling and innovative career. Let's learn how he did it so you can too.
What did you want to be when you were growing up?
Pretty early on, I knew I wanted to be an artist, but I was a little strange about it, I guess. I wanted to do posters and comic books, and it always had text in it. And I had encouragement. My grandmother was an art teacher for a university in Canada. So I think that's really important to people's development. And I always say, you need someone to tell you that your profession is okay. And my grandmother, from a very early age, told me that being an artist, being a designer was okay.
Greg attended Sheridan College in Canada for undergraduate and studied illustration. Sheridan is one of the leading schools for art and animation, which is the program he originally wanted to get into.
It was a very prestigious school, and it was all about combining art and science. And I thought that was really cool. I went to school thinking I was going to be an animator in computer animation, because that's kind of that perfect blend of art and science. But as I progressed and I actually didn't get into the program I wanted to, I took a fundamentals course, and that really taught me that illustration and the storytelling part of it and the mixture of text and design elements and more iconic graphics as opposed to sort of fine art. And I wasn't into abstract painting or anything like that. So that kind of brought me into illustration. And yeah, it was, like I said, it's a more rich storytelling and you get more narrative.
During his college years, Greg was an art teacher for 8 to 12-year-olds at the Forest Grove Academy of the Arts and Technology.
I coached basketball growing up. I always liked, teaching and working with kids, and I just went for it. And honestly, I did not expect I was going to get that job, but they took a chance on me. And it taught me so much forget about art, but for my life, patience, and that there is all types, and that you have to learn how to work with very difficult children and different personality types is more what I mean. But one of the things that management and direction of art and teaching kids, I think, telling other people how to do the thing that you love is really great for solidifying your own skills, as well as, just sharpening your mind on the theory.
Greg then interned with illustrator Scott Page in college and continued to work with him the summer after senior year as an illustrator/designer.
To me, it was the best way to get started in my career. He was doing exactly what I wanted. And I went in and I interviewed. I literally was walking up to the house, and one of the most talented illustrators from my class was walking out. And my heart sunk to my stomach, and I was just certain I wasn't going to get it. But somehow, I guess that dejection allowed me to be more confident in the interview because I got it.
Can you go into what he was doing that made you drawn to that experience and what you did from your internship to your then later job?
Sure. So one of the things that I liked about Scott was he was an illustrator. He did, commercial illustrations a lot for magazines and stuff. And I liked his style. I liked that he could do that. But he was also doing storyboards for ad campaigns and commercials, to print design, to a little bit of web design. And that's, where I saw myself. I didn't feel like I completely fit in the illustration world, because I wanted to do these other things too. I did, nerd out over using InDesign to make my CD cover, where other people they cared more about making the artwork behind it as opposed to making this final product. And I very much like making products and having that thing in my hand. So he did all of those things. And I knew I wanted to work there. And when I got it, I was really, really excited. And, this is the early 2000s. Everybody wanted a website at that point, and he didn't really know how to code for them. He knew some stuff about how it was put together. So I ended up doing all of the websites that he made. I coded them in HTML and CSS, and it was the early 2000s. So some of them were actually Flash, which is really just, I never want to go back to that time. It seemed exciting to me, if I'm being honest.
So let's take a step back. At graduation, people get really nervous. What was your feeling? I mean, you had this one job with Scott Page, but you didn't really know your future. What was the plan? What was going through your head?
Like everyone else, I was super nervous. I was super lost, but I was applying to so many jobs and not hearing back from a lot. And that's where I was starting to get, frustrated and lost and didn't know what was happening. But I think, I'm guilty of this a lot in my life, and I think it's definitely something people can learn from, is communicate what's going on with you to other people. And I didn't tell Scott number one, because I worked with him, but I didn't tell Scott the entire summer that I wanted a job. And he could have totally introduced me to this guy before. I was just sitting in my world, trying to applying to these jobs, not really reaching out to them, and not really giving my best, because I didn't know how. And, through networking, and through communicating to my desires and what I wanted to my boss at the time, he hooked me up, and I eventually got it. You need other people to help you learn too. So if you're not communicating, that you're sort of, when you're stuck in those spots and you're not learning from other people who can help you, I think that's, one of the other things that's kind of important, is to lean on the awesome people around you.
With help from his old boss, Scott Page, Greg moved from the suburbs to Toronto to work at Groove Media as a graphics/web designer.
They were a company that paired with another animation studio and made games. The thing that I worked on the most, which was kind of a cool idea, and the gambling rules in Canada at the time were different, was basically we would make games like a fighter game, a Street Fighter game type game, and you could bet real money on them and cash out. And it was kind of this online platform, fairly early in the really serious online world, and it was really sort of progressive.
So you mentioned on LinkedIn that you were part of a major site redesign for them. Can you tell us a little bit about that project?
Sure, definitely. And, that's a reoccurring theme in my life, it seems, is these big redesigns. And it's a tough project. There was a team of people, and my boss, his name was Matt, was part of them, who designed this big website as they're going. And you have thoughts of where this site could lead and what it could look like and how it could behave. And then you build it, and your customers interact with it, and you have to go a different direction. That's the way it's going to work. And that's what we did. So they needed a redesign because they had a whole bunch more games. That's another reason why companies redesign websites, is, to create systems to expose more content in a little bit of a streamlined fashion. And that's one of the things they wanted to do. They had, they went from 2 games to 9. How am I going to show those to our potential consumers? That, and a sort of refresh of just the visuals was what I worked on. It was kind of my first task.
Can you explain a little bit about the feeling of the first job out of college? What did you learn about, I guess, life or just working for a company in general?
Well, I think that's definitely one of the most exciting times in your life, that first job. And I was making, $35K and thought I was rich all of a sudden, because I was, compared to being a college student. So I think that there's that excitement that goes in. But one of the things just, that I realized in my first day, I had done all these websites. I was coming in strong. I had this great referral. And the first day I was given the most simple task. It was just, providing images for one web page. And it took me all day for whatever reason. It took me 8 hours. And at the end of the day, my boss, it should take, if it took me 20 minutes now, I would be upset. And I spent the whole day doing this task. And my boss at the end of the day, he said, Greg, how's that screen going? I said, no, I think I'm done. And I showed him my work. And he literally was like, no, we can't use any of this.
Oh, no.
And it's one of those things is that I realized is that, while my school was very hands-on and very technical, there's no better way than doing it. Just actually having to do these things. And, I hadn't worked for a big company with serious engineers before. So I was used to having to code them my way, and that was fine the way I was doing it. But when you're working with a big team, a big corporation, it's a whole different ballgame. You have to work and collaborate with other people and do it their way. And my boss made fun of me for about 10 minutes, and then he showed me how to do it in another 20, and that's probably close to the way I still do it.
Greg was there for about a year when he unfortunately got laid off. It only took him 3 weeks from the day he left Groove Media to find his next job, which was at Syncaps as a design specialist.
What exactly were you doing, and what was the operation there?
So Syncaps was a social media advertising agency. And, this was 2008 to 2010, very, very early in sort of that marketing idea of social media. And, it's funny enough, we were learning a lot of lessons from what Zynga was doing with Farmville, which is kind of ironic that I later worked there. But when I started, I was literally the first employee. I interviewed with this guy. He was 2 years younger than me. He was super smart, super motivated, and he was very technical for being sort of a sales guy. And I met him for coffee one day. The next day we met and he bought me a computer, and we hooked it up with Photoshop and sat in this little, it was similar to WeWork. In a way, we had this sort of one room office with all these other companies, and the company ended up being $1 million company, but it started in this one room with me and about 4 other people.
So you did that for 2 years and then what made you leave after that time?
So I had started to kind of acquire some of the skills that are under the UX umbrella. I've been working with an information architect. We were doing this huge website, which was meant to be what's called a CMS, a content management system, for companies who wanted to post advertisements on Facebook, on Twitter. And this was, the days where MySpace was still around. So MySpace was literally one of them. And I started to like that sort of thing. And it was cool. It was like solving a puzzle. You're moving around parts and trying to figure out what's important to people, what should be where, what do you have to cut and put on another screen, what can stay here. And that I kind of like that puzzle aspect of it. But I actually got to help out with my first app and design parts of my first app, which is why I left. And it's not, I fell in love with it. It's not like it scared me away and that's why I left. But it was a app for Perez Hilton's radio station in Canada. It was an absolute pink and purple nightmare, and it was unbelievable. But like I said, there was something about the puzzle of trying to, especially on mobile, where you're taking these websites full of content and trying to squeeze it into this tiny screen and just being more accessible. All of the changes that eventually came because people are so reliant on their phones were starting to happen. And I was so excited by the technology and the way it could make people's lives easier that I pursued a job doing strictly mobile UX at a company called 5 Mobile in Canada. I would say 5 Mobile, it was one of my favorite jobs because it was like advertising in that you had variety. Different corporate clients would come into us and say, hey, can you build an app? And this is 2010. People are really starting to try to move to mobile. And we would say, yeah, but we would work on them anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks to the longest one I worked on was for in total 6 months. And it was great variety, and it was great. It was like I said, it's a crash course in UX design for me. And I'm so thankful I took that opportunity.
As a UX UI designer, some of Greg's clients were from all different types of industries, including a newspaper and a sports app.
It was funny. Even the people who work for these companies are different. So the variety of the user who you're designing for is completely different. But the people you're working with, how prepared are they? How knowledgeable are they? It was really fun to kind of meet these groups of people and to collaborate with them and try to help them with their product.
So would they come to you with specific directions on what they want, or did you guys come in as consultants and say this is the main objective, the high level objective, and then you guys consult with how to get to that
A
design?
real variety, I would say. The people, for example, from Globe Investor were super organized, super smart, super sharp. They kind of knew what they wanted. They had this huge website, just so much content that was also very popular in Canada, and they wanted a lot of that content. Their goal was 60%. I actually think we got more in the end, but they wanted 60% of their website's content on this app. But just because they knew that, they were also really cool in that, hey, you guys can figure out how to do that, to organize it. We know it's a challenge. We're hiring you because we know you're better at it than us. And they had tried already, which is how they do that. And so that part was really interesting. But other companies, we had some huge companies that would kind of just say, just do whatever you want. And,
Which do
and
you
that always,
prefer?
I don't know. Kind of, I kind of like the former more. The latter, it's funny. It made me think of teaching kids, but I used to say, as an artist, the scariest thing is a blank page. And so one of the painting things we used to do is just throw a splatter of paint on a page and make it into something. But that's the way I kind of feel about UX design too. If someone's like, hey, just go do whatever you want. The world is so big. There's so many options. What am I going to do?
So you, at this job, we saw on LinkedIn, you said that you created flows, wireframes, and visuals based off a user-centric philosophy. Could you define what flows and wireframes mean?
Sure. So when you're coming up with really any software or website, a mobile application, a flow diagram is generally how you start. And that's just getting an idea of how this thing works. And game design does it in gaming, but for software development in general, it's stuff like the home screen is a list view, and you click on an item in the list, and it goes to a detail view, and then it goes to a related article. So it's planning out really high level how this whole thing works. So you go to the home screen and the friends screen, and then you click on a friend's profile. So you're really just laying out how something works as high level and as bare bones as possible. You're not sort of doing that with complete visual design of a screen or people's actual names. You're trying to pass an idea off to somebody else. And wireframes, I say, are a little more detailed. So my wireframes would have, they would have those cells on them. So you would have a list. Let's say it's that sporting app. You'd have a list of the baseball games on. And then when you clicked on it, you could see more details about the baseball game you're looking at. And you would actually have some of the details because it's a baseball game. You need to have a spot for 9 innings. So you're starting to, as you go from a flow diagram to a wireframe, really just start to get more detailed as you go.
What do you use to build wireframes then?
Yeah, that's a good question. We use Sketch for almost everything now because their pipeline is so good. It's really easy to change something that's a grayscale wireframe into a color mock-up later. So we've been using Sketch for flow diagrams, wireframes, and the final visual design now.
In 2010, 5Mobile got acquired by Zynga, and Greg became a UX designer at Zynga.
It was because they were trying to transition to mobile. They had started as a Facebook, mainly gaming company, and they were trying to move towards mobile. And we were great at it, especially our engineers. And they acquired us to work on their Android games and to work on their iOS games. So for me, as part of that, and because 5Mobile was very engineering heavy, and Zynga is as well, it was a little scary, honestly. I didn't know where we would fit in.
How long before, you've been with Zynga, and I guess since the acquisition, for the longest in your career so far. How long before you realized like this was the right company?
It was within the first year. I think I had started to sort of make more of an impact on the games that I worked on, which, for a while it was kind of a help on the littlest task here and there for a couple of weeks, and I was going from game to game. But it was when we started to get games in Toronto and being able to have a little bit more of ownership. My friend Gurpreet and I, who's actually, he moved to San Francisco later on to join us here, and is now the GM of the game. We came up with some great features for a game called Scramble with Friends, which eventually turned into Boggle with Friends. And once I started to have agency over the games and the features more, I think that's when I found my spot and was like, yeah, I can really excel here.
After 3 years working in the Toronto office, Greg decided it was time for a change. He moved to San Francisco to work at Zynga headquarters.
I started to make a big impact on the team, and they had asked me a couple times to move down, and I was very, Canadian and polite about it, but had refused. And eventually, as a team, they started to bring people on. There was this part of me that realized I had kind of already hit a ceiling in Toronto, and I felt like if I stayed, I may lose the ability to work on Words with Friends and continue making the impact that I was making. And it was just a good time in my life to do that. And I took the chance. And that's when after about 6 months of going back and forth, that's when I decided to move here.
He was leading a cross-disciplined innovation team that was responsible for prototyping new products for the Words with Friends franchise. He also planned content releases working with an art house to create the content. For example, around the holidays, his team and the art house would work together to create holiday characters within the game.
You hire these art vendors and they create the artwork for you. And it's a really great way to keep engagement with your game over a long time. Hey, people come in, there's something new, it's exciting. So I was running the vendor pipeline. We would come up with content. So it's the holidays, but what does that mean? Do you introduce a Santa character? Do you introduce a reindeer? Coming up with all of those, and then briefing and working with our vendors to kind of get them into the game.
So you were educating / mentoring since you were starting at 5 Mobile and kind of carried that over into Zynga. You also mentioned that you educated them on design best practices and processes. Would you mind sharing that with us as well?
Yeah, sure. For me, it's about the user-centric behavior, thinking about problems from that angle, and really logically and thoughtfully and carefully laying them out, starting from the research to design stuff all the way through. That's really important, that user-first mentality. And, spending the time downstairs in the user testing lab, behind the glass, and understanding and listening to and understanding your users, I think is super important. So trying to come from that angle at all times, whenever we're trying to solve a problem, even if it's a business problem. Hey, we're not making money. Okay, well, we have to come at that of like, what is the value you're going to provide to somebody? We can't come at it like, hey, we just need to make money, or people are going to smell that. They're going to think it's desperate. They're going to think it's gross. They're not going to buy what you're selling. So there's that part of it. And I think when you work for a business, sometimes that gets lost. So I think it's specifically the user experience team's job to keep reminding people that that's what we need to do to be successful. The best practices and the processes. I'm a super organized person as far as my files, naming conventions. Those things are really, really important, especially when you're working with a large team. We have 8 designers that we pass files back and forth on, and they need to be able to find stuff just as easy as me. So it's also just the best practices in that sense of, hey, this is going to help us work together as a team if you name your files this, or if you lay out your folders like this so we can see them. So that's all kind of my job. And this is the most boring part to some people, but it's part of my favorite part, because I do struggle with a little bit of OCD.
At least you admit it right now.
Yeah.
It seems like you almost need that for the job. You got to be super organized.
Yeah. So I think, if you looked at the latest article on Medium that I wrote with the engineering team at Zynga, we just changed our pipeline, the way we work. So we're all in on Sketch now. We're going to use Zeppelin to spec stuff out. So basically that was my job, to come up with this design pipeline collaborate with the engineering leads and make sure that it worked with what they wanted, and then communicate those best practices.
He was then promoted to Associate Experience Design Director after launching New Words with Friends. The team was shrinking after the launch, which is typical after completing any big project, and he had already been stepping up and doing the job.
I was lucky enough to kind of be in the spot where I was already managing a couple people, and they believed in me, and I stepped up and I led the team. I had a lot of help. My boss, Nick Giovanello, definitely helped me with the management, with hiring, all of the stuff that I needed to learn, moving from an IC, an individual contributor, to a more management role. Just because you're a good designer, it's not even the same skill set as a good manager. So it's definitely a transition and a tough road for some people, myself included.
What are some of the specific things you need to pick up to go from that IC role to a manager role?
Yeah, I think you have to be okay with a focus on something else. You're focusing on people, on mentoring people, creative people. Sometimes that can be like herding cats, but at the end of the day, like, it's super rewarding, and you're all in it together to make something amazing and beautiful and delightful for people. You're having one-on-ones with all your people and talking about career development, and you have people complaining that they want to get promoted, and you have to work with them on plans to get them there. And I would say it's a completely different skill set, and that's challenging.
Is that a skill set that you would say that you're comfortable now with?
Definitely. And I taught art, I coached basketball, all of those things that I had done before, gave me confidence that I could do it and gave me a little bit of background. But in business, it's definitely something that I've had to learn. And it's one of those things that for me, it was one of the challenges that I was very eager and happy to try to take on.
That wraps up part 2 in the UX Marks the Spot series. Huge thanks to Greg Hill for sharing his wisdom throughout this Experience a Day in the Life series. If you haven't already, be sure to listen to part 1 in this series to experience a day in the life of an Associate Experience Design Director at Zynga.
So they say you can't get a job without experience, but need experience to get the job. But luckily, we have quite the experience. You can join our team and experience a day in the life of the jobs you want by applying to be a student editor. Regardless of your major or amount of experience, this is the perfect stepping stone into any internship or career. Find more info and sign up at xadiddle.com/students. That's xaditl.com/students. Thanks for listening. Head over to xadiddle.com. That's xaditl.com. There you can find the show notes for this series and more A Day in the Life articles. And you can get to know us and our guests more by joining our communities on social media. Follow at xadiddle on Instagram and on LinkedIn by searching for Krista Bowe and Matt with 1T Poe.
If you learned something in this episode, please take some time to help our mission by leaving a positive rating and review of the show. Each week, we bring you a new interview series with guests from different jobs and different industries. In each series, we'll live a specific day in the life, hour by hour, and experience their career journey. So don't forget to subscribe.